We're now live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you in our weekly Professor Ved Nanda Fellowship Training Program in Human Rights, an enterprise of the ICHRRF. This is one of our weekly seminars, which we do for our fellowship training programs. At this point in time, I'm sharing my screen, and I hope all of you can look at my screen. So welcome to Fellowship Training Seminar Program. International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom has started a fellowship training program from January 1st, 2022. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of the ICHRRF, I invite all our audience to yet another session in the seminar series of ICHRRF. Let me introduce the faculty. Our distinguished faculty for the fellowship training program is under the mentorship of Professor Ved P. Nanda, Professor Yashodhan Pathak, Professor Nalini Rao, Professor Lavanya Vemsani, Dr. Shekhar Patel, myself, our Executive Director, Mr. Carl Clements, Mr. Hardam Tripathi Esquire, our Director of Legal Policy, Dr. Yashodhan Agalgaonkar, and Professor Nidhi Shendurnikar. At this point in time, we have two fellows. One is Ankit Shah and second is Ripudaman Pachauri. We have a standard format for our fellowship training seminars. It involves first 20 to 25 minutes presentation by a fellow, followed by 10 minutes comment by our chief mentor, Professor Ved Nanda. And after that, there's a 25 minutes discussion by the faculty preceptor that changes every week. So each faculty preceptor is assigned a particular topic. And last 30 minutes we spend on discussion and questions and answers. So the topic of today's human rights seminar is, it should be protecting, not protesting. There's a typo there. Let me just take care of this. So protecting children's rights. Let me correct here as well. It is protecting children's rights. And the fellow who will be making presentation today is Mr. Ripudaman Pachauri. And faculty preceptor today is Dr. Yashodhan Agalgaonkar. Before we start the formal seminar, I have a few announcements. Number one, that ICHRRF is going to hold a special hearing on Kashmiri Hindu genocide on Sunday, March 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. The other announcements are that Professor Arvind Sharma has graciously joined as member of the International Advisory Board of the ICHRRF. Mr. Brennan Parker has joined as Director of Religious Policy, and Ms. Christina Boozer has joined as Director of Planning. We are calling for application for July 2022 batch of fellows, and we are also inviting volunteer faculty if anyone is interested in participating in our faculty program. Some housekeeping rules: kindly mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode only so that an accidental, telephone call does not disrupt. Please don't try to interrupt our fellows or esteemed faculty preceptors when they are speaking. Only the members of audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. We do not encourage anonymous questioners. Please send all your questions by chat function. Please be very specific and precise in asking questions. Don't send lengthy comments in the form of a monologue. And lastly, like every other seminar, we will be recording this seminar on our YouTube channel, and it'll be available on our website. Most of our seminars are available on the website, barring some technical problems sometimes. If that happens, that is beyond our control, then we don't do that, but otherwise we record all the seminars because it is a resource material. So I am going to hand it over to our fellow today, Ripudaman Pachauri, and Dr. Yashodhan Agalgaonkar, who is the faculty preceptor today. So the floor is for both of you today, sirs.
All right. Thank you, Adityanji. Are you able to hear me properly?
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start my presentation. Protecting children's rights. Um, Protecting children's right for what? To improve our future. Children are vulnerable to abuse. Children's right to live and thrive is universal. But this right becomes more difficult to uphold the more children are legally marginalized. In the case of children who are undocumented, they do not have access to the same legal protection as citizen children who would limit the power of their parents or caretakers to abuse and neglect them. According to a report by United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, children on the move often lack basic civil rights, making them vulnerable to exploitation, trafficking, and other forms of abuse. Every child has right to a place to live, healthcare, education, and food. These are the basic rights. United Nations Convention on Civil Rights. United Nations General Assembly has adopted a new international instrument to promote and protect the rights of children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is designed to promote and protect all aspects of children's rights, including the rights to be heard in any situation that concerns them. Children should not be discriminated against on account of their gender or social background. They are also entitled to protection from being trafficked or forced into marriage before they reach adulthood. Article 2.1 of CRC states parties shall respect and ensure the right set forth in the present convention to each child within their jurisdiction without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of child's or his or her parents or legal guardians' race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, ethnic, or social origin, property, disability, birth, or other status. What are children's rights? Children's rights are rights of children that go beyond what their government or society gives them. They are rights that children should have to be safe, healthy, and happy. These are basic human rights for all people, but not everyone has them. Children's rights are important for every child. They help all children to grow healthy and happy and strong. Out of these basic rights, right to have a clean drinking water is also a basic human right. Water is one of the essentials we need to survive. Without it, life stops. Every day, many people around the world don't have access to life-saving water, whether they live in a slum or an isolated place far from places with fresh water and sanitation facilities. Their health is at risk. People who can't get water, can't wash their hands, they have no fresh water for drinking, cooking, and preparing food. And without safe water, children are at risk of disease. What must be done now? Access to safe water is a basic human right. All countries should respect this right. United Nations has been working hard to make sure that everyone on the planet has access to safe water and sanitation facilities. Right now, many people are working to improve things so that many children can have safe access to safe, clean drinking water. A big initiation by Prime Minister Narendra Modi from India, a sanitation program that he initiated a couple of years ago to provide sanitation for everyone in the rural area is a good example of it. The rights to decent living, food, and healthcare are just a few rights that children have. One of the most important things that parents can do to teach their children about their rights. This will not only help them in the present, but also in the future when they grow up and want to raise their own children, knowing their rights will be given, uh, knowing their rights will give them confidence and encourage to express themselves. Children rights, a parent's role. Parents need to make sure that they teach their children about the importance of it and respecting others' needs and rights, especially those of their siblings. This way, children will learn what respectful relationship is like and will pass this lesson to the next generation. Social engagement for children and children with disabilities. An important part of every child's growth is a social interaction with other children as well as adults. If the child does not have the opportunity to interact with their peers and have the opportunity to play, they won't develop social skills. It is very important that they can take part in the group activities and interact with children who are not disabled. Parents should be involved in their children's extracurricular activities because it will help them learn how to compete in society. Um, Children's rights are given by the government because children are too young to take care of themselves. Children rights given to children the freedom that they need in order to grow up healthy and happy. How do children learn about their rights? One example that I already gave about from the family itself. There could be TV programs, movies that educate children. Um, Children can start understanding the importance of their rights when they are in elementary school at around 6 or 7 years of age. Children's Right Day is May 1st in many countries, including United States and Canada. Children and Sustainable Development Goals. For 15 years, the Millennium Development Goal, MGDs, were a guiding force on many issues affecting the lives of children, young people, and their families. Over this time, tremendous progress was made in reducing the preventable child deaths, getting more children into school, reducing extreme poverty, and ensuring more people have access to safe water and nutritious food. However, progress has been uneven, and many of these progress issues for the world, including addressing inequalities, promoting inclusive economic growth, protecting children from the violence, and combating climate change, were not adequately covered in MGDs. With the adoption of new Sustainable Development Goal in September of 2015, world leaders have committed to ending poverty by 2030. But unless accelerated efforts are made, almost 52 million children may die before reaching their fifth birthday between 2019 and 2030. Children in sub-Saharan Africa will be 16 times more likely to die before the fifth birthday than the children in high-income countries. 9 out of 10 children living in extreme poverty will live in sub-Saharan Africa. More than 60 million primary school age children will be out of school. Roughly the same number of people are out of school today. More than half will be from sub-Saharan Africa. More than 150 million additional girls will marry before their 18th birthday by 2030. The vast inequities and dangers do more violate the rights and imperil the features of the individual children. They perpetuate intergenerational cycles of disadvantages and inequalities that undermine the suitability of societies and even the security of the nation everywhere. Children and the UN system. From the focus of the education of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and the Cultural Organization, UNESCO, to the effort of the international level organizations to abolish child labor, to the children and youth program of the UN Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugee in the Near East. to the school feeding and the health initiatives supported by the World Food Program, to disease eradication campaigns by World Health Organization. The UN system is there for children. How to protect the children's rights? A few most common situations where the children's rights need to be protected are the parents have withdrawn, the cases where the children's right need to be protected, where the parents have withdrawn their consent for medical treatment for the child, and court has ruled that the treatment should continue. Child abuses allegations by one parent against another. These cases can often take care by the attorneys who can take federal and the state law in account and help accordingly. Here, access to the attorney is a key element, and many orphans might not know the way to justice. They might know, they might now have even the, they might not know that they even have the information on how to get the justice. Factors that make it hard for children to live healthy lives. Children are being exposed to more and more toxic chemicals and harm the nervous system, liver, and brain. That harms the nervous system. The modern diet is low in essential nutrients like magnesium, zinc, vitamin A and E. Children have lower tolerance to toxic exposures than adults. Mental health issues such as anxiety and depression are on rise in children. Childhood obesity rate continues to increase. A number of children are suffering from ADHD, ASD. Obesity rates continues to rise along with kids. Children have shorter attention span than ever, which may be linked with the increase of sugar-sweetened beverages. Many children are being prescribed heart medications such as adrenaline, Ritalin, uh, that uh, that impacts their attention and uh, creates a hyperactivity disorder in them. The social violence and its effect on children. In a study, No Place for Domestic Violence, Changing the Lives of LGBT families in Southern uh, Appalachia in 2002, Maggie and Aaron Page presented data from a survey administered to lesbian mothers residing in rural areas. The study found that the seventh mother had experienced remorse at the hand of their partners. That is a staggering number when you consider that this is not only the women we are talking about, but the children as well. While additional research with a larger sample size would be needed to confirm this figure, it is clear that the problem of domestic violence in LGBT communities exists. They also found that 25% of their reported they are harassed by family members or others because of they being lesbian. Almost half of their respondents stated that they had been verbally assaulted at school because of their sexual orientation and gender presentation. The effects of child growth um, because of the businesses, how the businesses are impacting children's rights and their growth. Child labor is illegal in many countries. Child labor is not just about the children working hard, it is about the actual work they do. Children need to be protected from doing jobs with dangerous tasks and exposure to chemicals, smoke, dust, and other hazardous substances. Also, if the child is overworked or stressed at home, their education will suffer. The government should protect children's long-term rights by making sure that child labor laws are monitored and enforced. It should also come up with a solution for the families who can't afford to pay for their children's school fee. Challenges to child's education in US. There are many challenges. Few of them are absence of information about the government provided resources available to the children's education and food. There are many challenges such as poverty, lack of resources, violence that makes it hard for the children to stay in school. In other part of the world, other challenges are the international politics, international wars among the countries that directly impacts the children. Student dropout rates in USA. There are many reasons why kids drop out from the school, even though they have access to good education system and facilities. For some school, it's just not a good fit. Others may have a trouble adjusting. Some students also experience the family troubles, external stressors that interferes their success in the school. The women right organizations who are encouraging girl child education also sometimes fail to ignore the male child needs for the education and the growth in the society. The most prominent reason for leaving school is concerned about the finances and the lack of money. In addition to financial aid, there is also multiple other organizations that help students pay for the college. Student dropout statistics in different countries. Following are the percentages of the dropout in different countries by age. In United States, 1 in 3 students drop out of secondary school before graduating. In Mexico, it is 2.5. In Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, it is 8 to 9%. The highest rate is registered in Spain, 17%. Even though in some of the third world countries, it is up to 30% in Africa and some other countries. While the lowest are found in the Nordic countries like Denmark and Finland and Sweden, which is like 3, 4, or 5% respectively, and Norway 7%. According to UNESCO data, across the globe, dropout rates from the primary education varies from 1 to 35%. In United States, it's 22% of all students drop out before completing the school. The actual data is in 19 states is even higher, that is 31%. The reason for student dropouts from the school in Asia, mainly in East Asia, children and adolescents are often discouraged from pursuing higher education. They are seen as a financial burden on the family. They think they can make more money just by working. In China, it is norm for school-age children to work in factories. Families have a strong culture belief that all of their sons should know how to do manual labor in order to able to take care of their parents when they get older. The economic pressure is also great for parents that are also struggling with unemployment rates about 10%. In some families, if the child grades aren't good enough, they'll refuse schooling even if they want it because they don't want their child to be another burden on the family. Reasons of dropout students in Africa. The most striking results in this research is that 60% of these students drop out before they reach their final year of the secondary school. In Africa, as well as in the Western countries, there are a number of factors leading to the lower educational attainment and more student dropouts. These include lack of access to the education, poverty, conflicts, poor infrastructure, and resources at school, the cultural norms such as early marriage and pregnancy. Many African governments are working hard to improve the educational attainment of their citizens. For example, in South Africa, the government has committed itself to provide free secondary education to all the students. Government policies related to child protection in Cuba versus in USA. In Cuba, children do not have the same government protection as in the United States. For example, a child does not have a right to make decisions about their own health care. They also don't have access to an attorney if they are arrested and can be imprisoned up to 10 years without a trial. In contrast, United States children have more rights and protection under the law than in Cuba. Welfare state is a type of country that provides financial and social benefits for its citizen. The three main ways countries can provide this kind of support is by providing a universal health care and social insurance to all citizens, by providing a system of public education to all citizens, by providing a form of social security payments. From 1999 to 2009, Cuba spent 3.5% of its GDP on healthcare and education, while US spent 5% of its GDP on healthcare and education. Of the amount that Cuba devoted to healthcare, 91.6% went towards the medical expenses and rest towards the pharmaceutical. 1.2% went towards the administrative expenses. In contrast to US, the cost of the administrative cost of these expenses is much more higher. What kind of rewards can be given to the students to address the dropout issues? One good example is like the food schemes which government provides to students through the school system. That has been observed that these schemes have increased the enrollments in this school, especially it helps financially challenged families and motivate them to go to the school. One example is of the India, they awarded the academic scholarships, and after that, they observe a jump in the number of children enrollment in the schools. At the family level also, these incentives can be provided. I believe that parents should offer incentives for children to go to school. For example, if a child attend every day, they should get a small gift as simple as going to a park for playing for an extra 1 hour. Children are going through a lot in different parts of the world, especially in third world countries, and especially in the countries which are in the conflict zones and the war zones. A child's first few years are a very critical period for development and growth. In tumultuous war zones, children are robbed of the opportunity to develop and thrive. They often experience death, violence, and deprivation. UNICEF has put together initiatives that aim to ensure the right of the children war zone. One of these initiatives is the introduction of the child-friendly spaces in community centers near war zones. These spaces provide education, health services, and psychological support for children affected by conflict. The needs of children in war zone often go overlooked, but it is critical that we focus on their welfare. In Syria and Iraq, about 85% of the population is under 25 years old. 25 years old. In addition to being more vulnerable to violence, these children are also 40% less likely to be immunized against common diseases. This can have downstream effect on countries recovering from conflict. We need to ensure that the health providers are trained I was talking about the war zones, children in the war zone, they need they are often overlooked, but it is critical that we focus on their welfare. In Syria and Iraq, about 85% of the population is under 25 years old. In addition to being more vulnerable to violence, these children are also 40% less likely to be immunized against common diseases. This can be this can have downstream effect on countries recovering from conflict. Children in armed conflicts. More than 20 years ago, the world united to condemn and mobilize against the use of children in armed conflicts. Since then, thousands of children have been released as a result of action plans mandated by the UN Security Council and other actions aimed at ending and preventing recruitment and use of children by armed forces and groups. However, serious challenges for the protection of the children affected by armed conflict remain. In 2019, 1.6 billion children, about 69%, were living in conflict-affected countries, and approximately 426 million children, over 1 in 6, were living in a conflict zone. Millions of children.
Ripudaman kindly conclude.
Okay. So the key points would be the violence against children should be addressed by the system, and the policies should be made accordingly. There are also new era challenges like the technological challenges that.
Adityanji, thank you very much. It was very extensive, comprehensive presentation by Ripudamanji. And today I have kept my schedule so that I can be with you until 8. And with your permission, I would rather hear Yashodhanji to speak. And then after Yashodhanji, whatever the need is, I might take about 10 minutes if Yashodhanji can give me. And then Yashodhanji can go even after that. So it's 7:35. And if I can have 10 minutes, meaning thereby at 7:50, Yashodhanji, then I'll just make a few comments. And then with your permission, I have to leave at 8 for another commitment.
Okay. Yashodhanji?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Professor Nanda. And so I think I'll conclude in 10 to 15 minutes, and then you can have your comments over Ripudamanji's seminar. So I think Ripudaman.
After you, I don't think I need to have any comments.
No.
But I will make some.
I'm sure you will have a lot of suggestions and guidance for the legal frameworks and other things. So I think I'll start in a minute. Just a moment. I'll just adjust my mobile. I think what I feel regarding the presentation of Ripudamanji is he covered a lot of ground. He touched upon a lot of subjects, I must say that. However, I mean, there is always an opportunity to dig a little deeper, because child rights and various facets of child rights, and really why the any human right violation or child right violation happens, it has a lot of socio-political dimensions influencing it, and also geopolitical dimension influencing that. So I think Ripudamanji tried to touch upon some of those dimensions, and I also kind of would like to reflect upon some of the topics which he initiated. I hope he'll be able to spend a little more time on some of these topics, because some of the contemporary topics which he mentioned need a little deeper inquiry into those particular topics. And then, we can bring out those topics from purely a socio-political perspective or human right violation perspective as such. And then we would need somebody like Professor Nanda and other legal luminaries to guide us on what sort of a legal framework should come up for that. And I think some of those topics Ripudamanji did touch upon, such as impacts of environment and climate change on children, and whether we should treat that as a separate topic as such. There is a lot of work in the United Nations on armed conflict and its impact on the children. And also he has mentioned some of the other topics such as technology and their impact on children. And I think when he covered a lot of ground, I would kind of try to classify some of the diverse information shared by Ripudamanji in 2-3 different categories. Some of the topics he mentioned were classical topics on which some of the frameworks do exist, such as education rights and what are the frameworks in different countries to enforce and analyze, enforce those kind of rights, and to ensure that children get a lot of children get an education and children get food and nutrition. And those were the topics on which many countries, including India, US, or Western European countries, they do have some sort of a framework, but many countries, they still do not have even some sort of a framework. So there are certain lacunas even in the countries where there are frameworks do exist. There are some lacunas in the countries where there are no frameworks at all. So I would categorize the Ripudamanji's presentation a little more into the classical challenges with regards to child rights, which he tackled, and some of the contemporary challenges which need a little deeper inquiry, really, from various perspectives, from socio-political perspective, from the perspective of economic analysis, and even from the perspective of technology analysis and technological how technology is influencing the children. But before we get into that, I would like to ponder over some of the classical topics which Ripudamanji touched upon. And it would have been great if in the future, when Ripudamanji is looking at these particular issues, probably maybe at the moment he had this introductory presentation where he looked at some of the challenges happening with the child rights, but maybe a little deeper inquiry into socio-political tribulations which are leading to those child rights that is required. For instance, there is the United Nations Convention on Protection of Child Rights. It's pretty detailed, and it documents around 20 different factors, such as no discrimination. So discrimination itself is a very very broad terminology, and it can be a racial discrimination, it can be a discrimination based on their sexual orientation, it can be discrimination based on economic strata. So I think and various these layers and multiple these factors will affect child rights based on the socio-political environment of a particular country as well. And we can look at it again into 2 different categories, such as democracies and non-democracies. And then we can have a particularly specific treatment towards that topic. And I hope that Ripudamanji will find this topic interesting and then have a little more time to pick up on particular strand of child rights and work on it. There are other challenges, such as, for example, there are other requirements, for example, keeping families together. I mean, there are challenges because of the on the children, because of the family environment, family structure, and at the same time, what sort of a family children are raised into. Economic poverty, that will impact. Ripudamanji touched upon that. Also, contact with parents across countries when the parents are living in the diverse countries. These are some of the requirements stated by United Nations Convention. But probably I would also recommend Ripudamanji to look into in the future is how these various rights and then regimes of rights, they are impacting each other. I mean, he touched upon some of the topics, such as, for example, feminism and women's rights is leading to more programs in schools for girl child, which is great, which everybody will welcome. But whether it is adversely impacting the education of male child, that is something which someone needs to study, because it has been observed probably also in the US, and I do not have reference with me, but it is a study made by a a professor from Princeton, where he found out that the dropout rate amongst male child is maximum in the Western European nations and the United States. So the point is that whether the different human rights, like for example women's rights, whether it is adversely affecting child rights in some segment, so that needs to be studied. I'm not making any definitive comment that it is affecting, but it is a matter of analysis and it is a matter of consideration which one needs to have. Similarly, there are challenges which Ripudamanji very mentioned regarding the environmental rights, right? So basically, environmental rights and children, it is an upcoming topic really, is whether how environment is diversely impacting the children. So the point is that when we are talking about environmental rights, many times we end up talking about the floods, or whether we end up talking about the adverse impacts of climate change. And means whether the climate change is real or not, it can be a debate, but then it's the floods and other things which happen, which are natural disasters, they are really challenging, right? And those disasters can affect children in an adverse manner, and how to tackle those particular situations where you have floods or natural disasters, and whether we can nip it in the bud really by creating some challenges. So for example, there are certain interventions which are made by human beings, which are, for example, construction of dams, to take a case in point when we are talking about floods. So whether that can be managed and structured properly, so that doesn't lead to more challenges for children and humanity as such. So whether we can have a root cause analysis in many of these sectors, is rather than scratching on the surface and say, hey, whether particularly flooding and it's result of a climate change and it will impact the children, maybe there needs to have such problem statements which are generic in nature, and maybe we need to do some sort of a root cause analysis, and then we will find out a problem set which we need to address. So that kind of a mapping probably will be great in the future. I would say that this is one of the upcoming topics, and then there are challenges which Ripudamanji will find in that particular sector. And there is a urge to connect children with the environmental movement, but at the same time we need to also have some sort of a hierarchy of this thing, a hierarchy of the requirement or of the children, right? So basically now suppose somebody in Scandinavia, some young child in Scandinavia proposes that environmental rights for are be all and end all of it, and then probably proposes to some country in Africa that they need to have solar or wind energy, and at the moment probably they have coal power plants, and if they can't afford, basically the child in Africa might need electricity connection so that he can have some education or study at night. So the point is that one area of rights, child right or environmental right, if we will push it more, that might have some adverse impact based on the economic and socio-political conditions in another country. And I think we need to be mindful of that and need to have some sort of equanimity while we are proposing or maybe fighting for some of those human rights. And I have also kind of a reservation, or human right defender or human right activist. It has a more of a tonality of assertion and aggression, but this is more fundamental than that. And I think it's not a combative issue, it's really a human issue. Human rights is a human issue, but that's another philosophical debate, and I'm sure we don't have a lot of time to get into that at this point in time. But what I'm trying to say is, if we are trying to push one area of human rights for child rights, considering the environment, whether it is having an adverse impact on some based on some other geopolitical or socio-political or economic situation in other countries, so we need to maintain some sort of equanimity. I hope that Ripudamanji will have a time to flesh this out in the future. I'll finish maybe in 3 to 4 minutes. There are other challenges which regard to, say, technology rights or technology and exposure of children to technology. And this is becoming a big issue in countries such as India, as we might have seen, is that well, it's a boon and a curse, right? So because, for instance, there is no access, there is access to 4G technology in most of the families, but at the same time there are no enough smartphones, right? So when the child education was imparted during the corona period, the many children who didn't have access to 4G, they had access to 4G, but they didn't have access to smartphones. So at the moment, Government of India has come up with a very good initiative that they'll broadcast it on the television. So, but that's good. But at the same time, when we see the access to digital technology, when it's a fundamental right, at the same time, there are challenges with regards to that. So this is just a case in point. I do not want to make it a very India specific thing, but this is just a case in point. Like, for example, National Commission of Protection of Child Rights has taken exception to some of the serials which came on Netflix, for instance, which were not having the age rating, and children were watching those serials on the Netflix. So access to digital technology and internet, that is leading to many of the challenges. There are other challenges, and Ripudamanji pondered over that a little bit, but I think it requires much more comprehensive treatment, is children in war zones. Probably what is happening with the children today in Ukraine is a matter of concern, regardless of on which spectrum, on which side one stands from a geopolitical perspective. But the children and their education and their livelihood is important in war-torn countries. Look at, for instance, Afghanistan, where children do not have basic fundamental education because for 15 years it was a conflict zone, and use of children in a conflict zone, use of child soldiers, that's much more complex issue, and it can't be simply solved based on the education. But there are some very good intervention techniques which have been used, suppose in countries such as Afghanistan, where they have given some vocational trainings to children regarding, and then they are connecting those children from a war zone to the market, so that whatever products they are manufacturing there, at least they are purchased in the marketplace. So I think there are certain interventions which have also come about, and there are some success stories and failures and lessons. So I hope that Ripudamanji will get an opportunity to look at it a little more comprehensively. So probably, the approach could be, since it's a very broad topic, it has different socio-political strands and economic strands and geopolitical situations which impact child right, or any human right for that matter. I feel that Ripudamanji will have some time in future to pick up a particular strand and then focus upon it a little more, and then flesh it out, what are the factors affecting them, and then maybe we will find some areas where we need legal frameworks, and some areas where we need intervention from from an economical development perspective. There are some areas where we'll find that there is intervention required from a technological perspective. So we'll move towards solutions. I would like to thank everyone, and I hope that Ripudamanji might have found this topic interesting, and I tried my level best to expose him to some of the challenges in this domain. Thanks. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Yashodhanji. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Yashodhanji, Ripudamanji, and excellent presentations. I'll confine myself to a couple of things that Yashodhanji mentioned, and if time is, I might say a couple more words. One is that I would take up the environmental part. And as you know, Yashodhanji, the most promising part in the environment area is the climate change. And at the present time, before the European Court of Human Rights and before many national courts, and especially in Denmark and other places, Germany, it is children that have brought those cases. And children have simply said that at the present time, because of these emissions and climate change, our future is going to be jeopardized. And based upon that, what they have simply said is that the governments have got the responsibility to follow diligently, faithfully, the Paris Accords that they had made some commitments to, and that they need to go even beyond that. And the nicest thing is that at the present time, courts have taken cognizance of it. Courts have started asking countries to do that. So in the environmental area, at least in one part that I want to mention, that there is children's role, and children can, in a very constructive way, play that role. So it's going to be legally as part of it. And what has happened also is that today, after the latest reports by the International Commission on this climate change, it's very clearly pointed out that action needs to be taken. I think I'm going to stop here on this. And I think you began talking about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that gives you an indication that nation states are taking action. But global action, how did it begin? Because as we can look back at the children's rights, from centuries ago, children have been helping families and doing household chores, and you may call it child labor or not, but that's what happened. And then came the Industrial Revolution, and they started being in factories, they started being in mills, and at that time, unsanitary conditions, violence against them. And that is where, for the first time, global effort began that they need to do something about it. And on that global effort, I think before the Convention on the Human Rights of the Child, we might look at 1924, the League of Nations. And League of Nations then adopted at that time the Geneva Declaration on the Rights of the Children. And then the effort at that time was that it's not simply that you need to look at the child as able to provide some labor, but we need to look at children's rights from another perspective as a means for their development. And we have to look at their upbringing that instills in them consciousness, duty. And that was the beginning. Then 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Article 25 simply said, motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children shall enjoy the same social protecting. And therefore, as Ripudaman said, as you have rightly said, whether it's education, it's child, it's education, or you can think of healthcare, supportive environment, family life, all of that. And then, as you can see, 1982, 78. And then there was the Convention on the Rights of the Child drafted. Took 11 years because in 1989 it became operative. And today there are only 3 countries, Somalia, South Sudan, and the United States, that are not members. And I had just looked at it one time. There are 196 countries that are parties to that convention. And you rightly mentioned about non-discrimination. And we can spend a whole lot of time on it. But I think I would simply count for you 4 special articles of that convention, and Ripudaman ji might look into it. Article 2 was on non-discrimination. Article 3 is best interest of the child. Article 6 is right to life, survival, and development. And then a very important article, which is going to be probably given some kind of right and on which there has been a great deal of opposition, and that is right to be heard. United States, as you know, is not a party to this convention, but this convention had now 2 further developments, and those are the protocols in order to fill the gaps. And one that you already pointed out, and that optional protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict. And Ripudamanji talked about it, you talked about it. There's a whole lot that has happened on that one. And then there is the optional protocol on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. And at the present time, as you rightly said, a very important challenge that has been there is the challenge in this digital age and what to do about the technology. And what should the children be able to see? Who should be able to protect? What is the role of parents in it? Very briefly, I might mention that last December, because 10th December is the Human Rights Day, and on that day, the Secretary General of the United Nations took a very, very special initiative. And he said, because there had been a couple of studies, and I looked at those studies not fully, but it's Child Rights Connects position paper. And you might like to look at that, Ripudamanji. And then the Secretary General has said that based upon that and the need about all the challenges that you have made, he said there is need to develop a guidance note on child rights mainstreaming. And that is a very good initiative that has been taken. I think at the present time, you probably know UNICEF has done a lot of work. And at the present time, on child marriage, online sexual abuse, students that are out of school, and especially after COVID-19, the impact that had happened. And I think that is probably where I would conclude. I think at the present time, one issue that did not really, Ripudamanji mentioned a whole lot, and that is probably a very common issue, and that is violence against the child, harm to the child, abuse to the child. And in most instances, it is people who are close to that child and abuse that happens, and in the family, but violence against them, abuse against them, and a whole lot of work in the recent past, in the last couple, 3 years, has happened on it. So Ripudamanji might look at that violence issue, because that would be good to look at. And I think at the present time, with your permission, I have to leave. So
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Nanda. It's always a pleasure to have you for your wider international perspective on every issue.
Right.
And we are fortunate to have you, as chief mentor for this program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Nanda. And as you very rightly mentioned, some of the issues regarding environmental and climate change rights and its impact on children, they're not even on the radar of many developed nations, unfortunately. So, but yeah, thanks to very interesting comments. We have taken some notes. I'm sure Ripudamanji will have some time to look into those, and we will look at some of the reports and white papers and articles which you suggested.
Namaskar, Sadar Namaskar, Adityanji.
So it was pleasure to have this presentation initially by Ripudaman, then Dr. Yashodhan's discussion of the problem, and then Professor Nanda's expert comments. I just want to specify one thing for the audience as well as for our faculty. In this seminar series, this is the first seminar topic on children's rights. So we have had a whole, slew of topics on human rights, women's rights, etc., etc. But this is the first seminar. And considering the format we have, that we allow only 25 minutes to the fellow to make his or her presentation, I think it is too much to ask Ripudaman to have everything available in 25 minutes and then cut him short and then say that he did not discuss this or discuss that. So that is our lack of understanding of the process of the seminars and our role as faculty preceptors, that this is the first broad topic. And yes, down the line, we will probably have some specific topics. So it's not, I am trying to say that it is not Ripudaman's lack of in-depth coverage, but our understanding of the process. And I would invite all of you to, attend all the seminars, so there is kind of, overall vision as to what we are doing. I will invite comments and questions from other people who have been present. So this, we have like half an hour for question and answer, and if anyone wants to ask a question, please go ahead.
One quick comment, Adityanji, as you mentioned very rightly, myself and Ripudamanji, when we exchanged the notes, we were discussing this, that each, everything which we are discussing is kind of a we have a one-day workshop on that. And I think Ripudamanji has done a great job in covering the entire ground. And as you very rightly said, these are simply titles over which much more comprehensive research or workshops are required. But thanks. Sorry, over to others for more comments and
I think Professor Pathak wants to make a comment. Professor Pathak. Yes, Professor Pathak, please go ahead.
Oh, I hope I am unmute, correct? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's nice to see Yashodhanji online. I just have one simple question, and it is a stupid question. When you talk about children's right is directly connected with the his mother's rights, or then the family right, then comes the society rights, and then comes the national rights, because most of the issues which are directly related, like children in war area, where the national rights have been what is happening in Ukraine, So are we in a right direction to get into compartmentalizing the concept of rights, or there should be a total picture where, I don't know how to put my question, but I think is it a Western thought process, or how it can be translated into Eastern thought process?
No, I think after Adityanji, I would go. Please, Adityanji. No.
I think Professor Pathak, you have, made this dilemma very manifest, and I think in his commentary, Dr. Yashodhan was talking about that, which right trumps over the other right? Are we going to have one unimodal concept of rights that, and several examples were given that, if you trump environmental rights as the most supreme, and then expect sub-Saharan African children to have the same attitude as somebody, or same thinking as somebody from Scandinavian nations, I think this is the sort of, anomaly and irony that we do not have sense of proportion and sense of balance. And since ICHRRF projects alternative points of view about human rights, about women's rights, about religious freedom, about, marginalized communities, instead of, sort of following what is the current thinking in the international arena, I think we need to look at specific communities and their needs and have a very balanced sense of proportion as to what is good for this particular community or children of this particular community. There cannot be any, single defined, standard for each society especially because different societies are at different phases of development, their needs are different. I think what trumps as the most important thing is the right to survival, right to life. For children, that is the most important thing. And we are not talking enforcing the rights, we are talking about protecting the children. Protecting their lives, that is what we are talking about. So yes, this is a very important question. And rather than getting into East versus West, I think we need to say that we need to be more avant-garde and we need to be much more balanced rather than harp about single issues uh, and take a more holistic viewpoint. I know Dr. Yashodhan wants to say something.
Yeah,
you allow me just 1 second.
Yeah, please.
I just want to make one point. The people have thought that there should be women's rights. So they propose that there should be women judges in the court. Then now the LGBTQ rights are coming up. So they are proposing that there should be representation of LGBTQ. Are we going to follow the same track and say that tomorrow there will be only children's court? The judges will be children. And for fourth grader, third grader should be the judge, because something that sort of thing. I don't know where we want to go. Thank you very much. I will stop here and shut up.
No, I mean, thank you very much, Yashwanji, for your pointed intervention, and Adityanji also. And I mean, definitely, I mean, I did not touch upon that yesterday while myself and Ripudamanji, we were discussing, because as Adityanji was pointing out, it's a very broad topic and we discussed a lot of different strands. And then, but yeah, I mean, Indic philosophical perspective to the whole affair of human rights, because the point is that if we look at it from an Indic philosophy, and correct me, I mean, I'm not an expert on Indic philosophy, but we have the concept of dharma. And if we consider like Pitru dharma or Putra dharma or even a Raja dharma, so what is the Raja dharma, or a king's duty, or a duty of a government towards children, or what is a father's and mother's duty toward the children? So if we look at it from that prism, many of these challenges can be tackled, and they were tackled in that sense probably in ancient Indic society. But I mean, there might be a little more broader view towards that, as you mentioned, we can take, such as look at Eastern philosophical and then Eastern social structures as such, how used to happen in Eastern societies. But definitely, I mean, that's definitely one of the aspects which can contribute to this whole concept of human rights, is the concept of dharma. And by dharma, I mean duty. A duty of a father towards child, duty of a government towards child, or duty of a government towards, in general, most of the human beings. And then I think there is a rich literature available to that end, which someone should explore.
We had actually discussed those things in previous seminars. Let's remain focused on protecting children's rights. Ripudaman, do you want to have?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of comment on what Dr. Pathak said. So it depends as a policy maker or as an administrative officer, what your political inclination is, what your personal biases are. If you are at that position, if you are able to influence the society and make a policy change or a pseudo policy change, then yes, then the things which are lower in the hierarchy, like for example, when he said the child's rights are related to the women's right, or the mother's right. But here, like I'll mention a case in the state of Missouri where kids as young as 6 years old were told that they have freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, freedom to choose the sex, and they have been asked to basically express their feeling about their sex. The girls were basically kind of, and the boys were forced to express whether they feel boys feel like a girl or not, or girls feel like a boy or not. And they even had, and the teachers were basically encouraging those feelings in the kids. It is like giving a doll to a boy or versus a girl, or a ball, giving a ball for playing to a boy versus a girl child. And they were encouraging even to the extent that the kids have a different names. Boys have a feminine names in the school that only the school knows about it, and the school were addressing the boys with the girls' name and the girls with the boys' names, and this was kind of a secret society. This was exposed a couple of years back, and the case is still in the court. So and that was basically was done by one of the principal of the school or administrative office. The lesson plans were that were published at the school website were different than the lesson plans were basically followed in the school. So in some of the cases, the left-leaning political agenda was also basically propagated among the students, even some of the religious
Raman, you have made your point
agendas.
very clear. So let's move on. I think Dr. Yashodhan wants to say something.
Very quickly, I mean, there is a definitely from a pedagogical point of view of, and we have a lot of academicians here, and I would like to hear from them. Is it's what education which we impart on children, boy or a girl, is very interesting domain, because as Ripudamanji was mentioning, is like this whole ties into, and I'm not making any definitive statement whether this is right or that is right. We need empirical data, more data, need analysis, and come up with certain conclusions here. But for example, this whole thing ties into the debate of equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. So the point is that if there was in Scandinavia, there was a study which was conducted where free choice was given to boys and girls, and boys ended up choosing more technology oriented vocations, whereas women ended up choosing more human related professions, such as where becoming doctors and nurses, and maybe having a profession where there is a more human interaction, whereas men chose more vocations which were more to do with the things such as technology and other things. So I mean, I'm not really commenting whether there are any biological markers there. Means Dr. Adityanji can comment upon that. But that leads to a whole structure of this pedagogical experimentation which is happening in the schools, where they're encouraging boys to play with dolls, and girls to do more masculine.
Okay, Dr. Yashodhan, you made the point very well. I'm going to draw other people into the discussion. So, Carl, do you have any comments at this time?
I just had a couple of comments just about about education and so forth. One of the things that I feel is a hugely underreported or less talked about issue is that in many former colonies of Britain and France and Africa, South Asia, and so forth, they still don't make higher education available in the mother tongues or even anything close to their mother tongues. It's still in English or French. And I think that's a huge violation of the rights of little children, especially from those who are not socialized to speaking in English or French. And we hear every year of cases of suicide of young, bright children from non-English or French-speaking backgrounds who commit suicide because then they are thrown into the deep end of English medium or French medium education. So that's one thing I wanted to bring out. The second thing is this very interesting concept of one type of human rights conflicting with another type of human rights. Like, for instance, in Iran, when they declared themselves an Islamic Republic, they also set the age bar for a girl for marriage to 9 years old. That's not just on the books, it happens quite often. So they would say it's a religious right or cultural aspect, and then it conflicts with, I guess many would argue that that conflicts with the rights of the girl child. Similarly, 3 or 4 years back, there was a major scandal where the top bosses of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, were implicated in a pedophilia ring, child sex abuse ring, and along with them several members of the British elite, including top British politicians. And for the first few months after that scandal broke, the BBC put out a couple of articles suggesting to its readers that pedophilia should not be judged too harshly, because they said that just like homosexuality is a sexual orientation, they were suggesting that pedophilia is also just another sexual orientation that has not been recognized yet. So I just wanted to, and you have historically the Sotatic zone from Afghanistan all the way to Europe, where homosexual pederasty was extremely common. The majority of Pashto romantic poetry is from a grown man to a young boy. So I think that's a very gray area, and I think I was wondering whether there are any objective measures of what is really good for children or not, rather than relativizing it culturally or psychologically. Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. Very valid comments. We'll come back to them later on. I will invite Professor Rao if she has any comments. Professor Rao, do you have any comments? I don't think she is there. Oh, she is there. Please unmute yourself, Professor Rao, and we want to listen to your comments.
Oh, you know what? I am a novice in this field. I've never done children, but I learned a lot today how comprehensive and complex this whole subject is, and its relation to women and political and sociological, aspects. I just had one simple question. Here we see children working in high school, in the restaurant or somewhere during summer, whatever it is, and is that child labor? And secondly, another question: is there a direct relationship between child labor and dropout from school? Because there are so many dropouts that have psychological problems. They don't have financial problems, they don't work, but yet they're dropouts. How do we connect the two?
I think, again, these are very valid questions. What is child labor? How you define child labor? ILO has its own standards about child labor. In certain countries, whole of industries were wiped down because they said that this is child labor, you cannot work this way. So there are contrasts here and ironies here that you decimate the economies of certain less developed countries invoking the child labor standards, but in most of the Western worlds, use of children in service industry is fairly common. Similarly, there is use of children in some of the sports. Okay, in camel racing in whole of the Middle East, children are trafficked from poor countries and are made jockeys for camel races. But the international community, absolves all that with a wink, wink, nod, nod situation. So we have a lot of anomalies. There are no clear-cut answers. And countries like United States, they don't ratify any international conventions. So you cannot hold them to any international standards. So we have those kind of anomalies. I would like to invite one of our guests, Shanti Raghavan. If you have any, Shanti ji, do you have any comments, observations, questions? I think she joined very late. Shovik, do you have any comments on this topic of protecting children's rights? Okay, we cannot hear you, so
Yeah, please
there's
unmute
some
yourself, sir.
Thank you, doctor, but I'm just listening you guys. I just joined late. I'm sorry. Please carry on. I'm listening to this enlightened conversation. Thank you.
I'm going to invite Dr. Yashodhan if he has any comments on Professor Rao's question.
I mean, very interesting couple of problem statements which are defined by Professor Rao. Of course, they'll need a little more research, but when it comes to the dropout rate and then the child labor, there is a definitive correlation established in most probably, I think, in Jharkhand, which is one of the states in India, where they found that there was a lot of dropout rate in the schools. And basically, when the root cause analysis was carried out, they found that at that time period, it was a harvest season, and parents wanted children to work with them on the farms. And when they addressed that and then adjusted the timings in the school, the dropout rate came down. I will look into the data and particular case study and send it across to Ripudaman ji and others. But there is a definite correlation which is established. Whether that correlation holds true in the developed countries in Scandinavia, we have to study that, and whether that holds true in the United States, which has a different economic children in different economic profiles or come from different economic strata. I think there is a analysis which needs to happen there.
So since there are no other questions and things like that, we have 6 minutes left. I will give some quote unquote my comments and bring in everyone's perspective. Professor Pathak had a very rhetorical question, and he used a technique which is called in logic called reductio ad absurdum. So he used a rhetorical question about, whether children would be become judges and all that sort of thing. It was just reflecting the absurdity of certain philosophies to have a single point agenda without looking holistic point of view. We always have to see the relative balance of proportions. And whenever there is this imbalance, you have an imbalanced attitude, you end up harming one section of the society. So we talked about child labor issues actually sometimes not being uniformly enforced. What about right to life? So in this society, you have right to bear weapons, and that right to bear weapons brings weapons in children's schools and kills children. What about the rights of those children who have been killed, slaughtered because of the right to carry guns? What about the rights of those parents who have been killed because you think that there is primacy to enforce the right to bear arms? So each society must reflect, introspect, and not have a schizophrenic attitude that only one right is superior to the other. We talk about children's rights in a very woke manner about sexual rights and all. What about child sexual abuse? By any standard, in 55 countries in the world, where you have certain laws allowing child marriage at puberty, is grossly, patently female child abuse, sexual abuse. But nobody wants to talk about it because religious right, the politically correct philosophy of, the left or liberal philosophy will not allow you to speak against right of religion of certain countries and enforce their laws, which is actually abusing female child. If somebody is becoming mother at 11 or 10, that is gross child abuse. So again, we need to have a different viewpoint about human rights, about children's rights. In this country, even like 1.5 years ago, children were being torn apart from their families and put in cages. This happened in the United States. We are talking about human rights when we talk about enforcement of children's rights, but nobody said a word. So a lot of anomalous things happen. Mr. Clemens talked about the pedophilia ring in BBC. That's a common phenomenon. You know, British police refused to prosecute certain gangs who were grooming girls in a geographical location in UK because they didn't want to be called racist or being Islamophobes, because these gangs belong to a particular religion and their job was to groom girls belonging to certain ethnicity and sexually abuse them. So you find these anomalies in various countries. The most important thing is that we protect our children irrespective of our philosophical biases, and not use the philosophical biases or woke thinking to abuse the overall standards and try to modify and hijack the standards in one direction without taking a balanced viewpoint. Historically, children have been harmed. In 70s, social workers in this country tried to magnify the problem of childhood sexual abuse. Families were torn apart because they used anatomical dolls and coached the children to say things against the parents. This happened. So a lot of things have happened, and I think we need to have a much more balanced viewpoint and ensure that other kind of rights do not actually impact child survival. And the last example I will give, because of policies of this country, millions of Iraqi children were subject to malnutrition, slow death because of lack of medical facilities, lack of ICU equipment. It happened at a mass scale over a prolonged period of time. It was mass child genocide committed by policies of one country who decided to go and conduct an illegal war in Iraq. So we have to learn to live with these examples. And my hope is that we just sensitize ourselves about protecting children rather than enforcing anyone's rights. So with that comment, I will end this session of our fellowship training program. And yes, there will be future topics on child rights issues belonging to various subtopics. My thanks to Ripudaman Pachauri and my thanks to Dr. Yashodhan Agalgaonkar. This is the first seminar he has ever attended. I hope it is not the last. I hope we see you and your wisdom in discussions of future seminars. You bring a lot to the table, and thanks a lot to everyone who joined for the seminar series, and we'll end this at this level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adityanji. I'll definitely look forward to attending others. This is really an enriched format which you have, in which right from the preceptor to audience to the everyone has the opportunity to learn. And thanks everyone for comments.